joining us for today's edition of Ocean Plastic Webinars. I know you've missed us. We took a bit of a break in August, but we're back and ready to thrill you with more of what's happening around the world. Today, we decided that in honor of the International Coastal Cleanup Day that happened on Saturday, we would have a panel discussion called Cleaning Up Our Oceans, a panel discussion on mitigation efforts. So we've got three great speakers from different parts of the world tackling marine pollution at different parts of the value chain here for you. Our first speaker is Freya Crafts from the University of Wollongong. Freya, please, you're welcome.
Hello.
Freya will be talking about tackling marine plastic pollution in New Zealand's finfish industry, case study of Moana, New Zealand. Just a quick reminder, if you'd like to ask questions, please go to Slido, so sli.do, code #OPW. Freya, the floor is yours.
Lovely, thank you, Takunda. I'll just share my screen. Okay. Awesome. So yeah, I'd just like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that I'm presenting from today, which is the Wiradjuri people of Wiradjuri country. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I acknowledge that Aboriginal sovereignty has not been ceded. This was and always will be Aboriginal land. Yeah, I'd also like to thank Takunda and the other organisers of the Ocean Plastics webinars for the opportunity to speak today. So yeah, as Takunda mentioned, my name is Freya, and I'm currently completing my PhD at the University of Wollongong in Australia. And in early 2020, I undertook an Association of Commonwealth Universities Blue Charter Fellowship in New Zealand at Massey University with Takunda, who was actually there as well, which was lovely. And Dr. Tusia Farrelly was my supervisor. So in today's talk, I'll be discussing the project that I did while I was in New Zealand. So I'll be unpacking the case study and thinking more about what the findings of this can tell us about the current context of marine plastic pollution and the fishing industry. Just check that my slides are actually working. There we go. So just to briefly explain the project. So we were working with a local fishing company called Moana New Zealand, who had approached my supervisor, Dr. Farrelly. So it was actually them who instigated the research, and they were wanting to look at ways to reduce their use of plastics throughout their entire operations. And so we sort of modelled the project around this. And our main aims were to recognise what the material flows of plastics are within this company, and also to seek ways to prevent the leakage of plastics into the ocean at every stage of their supply chain. And I suppose in an overarching sense, we were looking at how we could reduce plastic generally, both within this particular case study and also throughout the industry more broadly. And we wanted to do this in a way that incorporated the case study and the qualitative work within this, while also looking at current global, regional and local policies and initiatives. So this slide, wherever it is, shows the main research questions that we went into the project with. So we were interested in what was happening in the government and policy space, but also what is happening in the private sector, so NGOs, industry and other innovations. And we conducted some desktop research to try and build an idea of what is happening around the world in terms of fisheries and plastics. So in terms of our case study, we were interested to see the ways that the new shifts and development in policies might highlight the need for an operational shift in terms of the plastics used in the fishing industry and also their methods for end-of-life disposal. So I'm sure this sort of comes as no surprise to anyone here, but the fishing industry is sort of responsible for a significant amount of marine plastic pollution. So many of the items that are used by the fishing industry contain plastics. This includes things like nets, nylon lines, ropes, drifting fish aggregating devices, even down to things like wet weather gear and safety gear, as well as things that people might not think of, like the plastic packaging on food and beverages that are taken on board by fishers while at sea. So there's actually a lot of plastic fishing gear that turns into marine plastic pollution through either being abandoned, lost or discarded. And some estimates suggest that 46% of the macroplastics found in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch are actually derived from fishers. And another estimate suggests that 640,000 tonnes of fishing gear enters the ocean each year. And yeah, I'm sure that we've all sort of seen the images such as the ones on this slide throughout various media, and these sort of show the effects of ghost fishing. So obviously the point of fishing gear is designed to catch fish, and they don't stop, fishing gear doesn't stop doing this when it's sort of left in the ocean. But other things to consider include the paint fragments coming off ships and fishing vessels, which contain microplastics that then leak into the marine environment. And Lacerda et al. Actually found that in certain sampling points in the Southern Ocean, there were 30 times more paint fragments found than other plastics. And these fishing-related plastics are only in relation to the sea-based elements of commercial fishing. So if we actually sort of think about the industry as a whole and the land-based elements of this supply chain, we then have to take into account the plastics that are used in processing, in packaging, and in distribution. And yeah, this was an important part of our research, so to sort of take into account this entire supply chain, as plastics are used extensively in the land-based elements of this. And the plastics that are used are not easily recyclable, or they are single use. So there's a chance of mismanagement, even in things such as consumption and end-of-life disposal. And that could see the plastics leaking into the marine environment. So to conduct the study or the project, we employed mixed methods. So we conducted, sorry, I think I might have skipped ahead there. Oops, anyway, they're the methods. Semi-structured interviews of staff, both fishers and managers in the factory. We did some observations of the company and operation. So I went on sort of factory tours. I also went on tours of some of the vessels. And one of our main aims was to conduct a qualitative study that examines the attitudes and perspectives of people working in the finfish supply chain at Moana, New Zealand, which is one of the largest, or is the largest Maori-owned seafood company in New Zealand. So we wanted to determine the participants' understandings of the issue, their ideas for potential solutions, and also what they perceived to be the biggest barriers to change. And I think sort of the premise for doing it like this was that it's all well and good to come up with alternative methods for doing things. But if these weren't going to work from a fisher's perspective or from a factory perspective, then they're really important things to know. So I guess what we're trying to do is sort of shift a top-down approach in management and decision-making. So shift from that to sort of thinking about what actually works on the ground. Unfortunately, about 4 days into fieldwork, I was forced to return to Australia as a result of COVID. So everything else was done remotely, which sort of had a few challenges, but we got there. So we based the work around the zero waste hierarchy. And essentially our aim was to look for mechanisms that fed directly into the top tiers of the hierarchy. So looking at how plastics could be refused in this context, and where this was not possible, where we could minimise the use of plastics and rethink the current industrial systems. So, you know, this ideally involves large-scale operational change in order to redesign the flows of plastics and start transitioning towards the circular economy. So polypropylene, polyethylene, and nylon are the polymers that are most commonly used in the fishing industry. And these are generally quite high quality plastics. So they therefore have the potential to be repaired, to be reused, and to repurposed or to be recycled. And that's kind of an important thing to consider in relation to the zero waste hierarchy and this industry. And we also thought about the idea of recovery in this context, which I understand is different to how it's thought about in the zero waste hierarchy, but we chose to discuss it in terms of recovering or retrieving plastics, which could see fishers collecting plastic pollution from the ocean, which was something that Moana fishers were already doing. So I think it's sort of important in that sense to remember that fishers, well, yes, they are part of the problem. They are also a potential part of the solution. And in this sense, they're sort of ideally positioned to contribute to marine plastic pollution prevention strategies. So fishers have a sustained presence in relatively isolated marine environments, which means they have the potential to support the monitoring, including self-monitoring of plastic pollution in the ocean. So another sort of part of this project was actually looking at a potential collaboration between Ghost Diving New Zealand, who are part of the Global Ghost Gear Initiative, and seeing how they might be able to be involved with Moana. And the representative that I sort of spoke to at Ghost Diving New Zealand was really excited by this potential opportunity to collaborate with the fishing company. So these talks were in a quite preliminary stage when I was there, but they were centered around the idea that perhaps fishers could alert ghost diving representatives to the presence of ghost gear with GPS coordinates, or that fishers may be able to help in the retrieval of ghost gear in other ways. So yeah, I guess hopefully these sort of cross-sector collaborations are things that can be expanded upon and sort of fostered into the future. So interestingly, there was also sorry, I'm just trying to work out where I'm at. Interestingly, there was also a feeling amongst fishers that sea-based marine plastic pollution was not a big issue in New Zealand, especially in relation to other countries. But, they were still pulling up plastic pollution in their hauls. And I think there's a sort of misconception that plastic pollution just floats on the surface of the water. But due to the way plastic degrades, it does become invisible from the surface. And based on the findings of our research, we started to get an idea of the where, why, and how that plastics were actually used throughout the finfish supply chain. And I apologise if that's a little blurry to see there, but sort of blown up big, it doesn't quite work as well. And this sort of flow chart, we created that to illustrate the flows of plastics. And as you can see, they're quite complex, which illustrates, I guess, a reliance on plastics and the need to rethink and to restructure this industry, especially if we consider that this, if this is how plastics are used in one company, then it's most likely the way that they're going to be used in most others. So the blue ones there actually indicate the sea-based plastics, and the green ones illustrate the land-based, and the arrows show the direction that the plastic was traveling. And in terms of some of the findings, and I realize that I won't have time to talk about all of them, but polybins were consistently recognised as a key challenge to preventing marine plastic pollution in the company's operation. And that was sort of something that was flagged to us at the beginning of the study by the company themselves. And so, yeah, polybins are the polystyrene or expanded polystyrene fish bins that are commonly used in the distribution of seafood. And I think it's important to note that this is not just an issue for this company, but for any seafood company that's exporting their products. So these expanded polystyrene bins are not used on the boat, but they're only used in the distribution section of the supply chain. So the pictures on this slide, there we go, in the left and in the middle are actually pictures of Moana seafood in polybins that I just happened to stumble upon in my local shopping mall once I got home to Wollongong. And this sort of shows, I guess, the way that seafood is exported internationally. As you can see, there's quite a bit of plastic involved in that. So the Moana factory used 350 polybins a day, which translates to 91,000 a year. And, they're not a particularly large fishing company comparatively. And the thing about these bins is they're designed as single-use products. And there's also not a lot of evidence as to what happens to these polybins at the end of their life. So one respondent sort of mentioned seeing polybins just being blown around overseas fish markets. And I guess it's also quite a worrying fact when we consider that Erickson et al. Reported that the expanded polystyrene is one of the most commonly observed microplastics in ocean spaces. So it's really important from an industry perspective to start thinking about alternative delivery systems of this fresh seafood product, which obviously does carry logistical difficulties, as fresh produce has to be stored and transported in a certain way for hygiene and food safety reasons. And, we're talking about especially wet products, which becomes challenging when you think about trying to transport them internationally. So we examined certain alternative options like wool cool, which is a cardboard box that is insulated with sheep's wool. And that's been flagged as a potential way to transport and deliver fish to overseas markets, especially within the Australian market, as there is a potential for collaboration with the big fish markets there. But the biggest barrier to this was cost. So you sort of have to be realistic about what a company can do. And as it currently stood, making the transition to wool cool would double the costs. And the company had sort of said that they were willing to put money into making changes, but doubling the costs of one mode of distribution was something they were unwilling to absorb, as it's just a significant amount. But one of the participants that we spoke to sort of suggested the idea of inter-industry collaboration and the idea of creating economies of scale to try and start limiting the upfront costs of making these changes. So this sort of centers around the idea that if a few companies band together and get on board with wool cool, this would potentially lower their costs. In terms of the biggest barriers to change across the board, not just for polybins, it was unsurprisingly cost that really stood out here. And this is because to significantly reduce plastic use, it will require operational change in fish processing and distribution. But yeah, I guess it's important to note that some of the recent policies by the NZ government want to phase out some of the plastics that are hard to recycle and commonly used in packaging and distribution. And that includes expanded polystyrene, which will mean that before long, the industry will have had to come up with alternatives anyway. And this isn't just the case in New Zealand, but that's sort of the case globally, where the tide does seem to be turning in terms of these policies. So this table we created to show some of the potential mechanisms to reduce plastics throughout the industry. It draws on current research, innovations and policies. And I think it's really important to note that some of the examples on here. Pardon?
I'm going to have to tell you to wrap up.
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm pretty much done. Yeah, basically just saying that there's some of the mechanisms to help minimize plastics used in this industry. And, you know, what we found is that fishers had a real willingness to change, as well as factory staff. So there's a real perception that, you know, plastics were an issue and that there was a real desire to sort of be part of the solution, as those sort of quotes show. I guess the main premise, just to wrap up, of our project and what we found is that the industry needs to recognise that change is inevitable and we can't maintain the status quo. So implementing changes now in both the land and sea-based elements of fisheries, even if it is costly and difficult, will be beneficial to the fishing industry in the long term. And the New Zealand government wants to make best practice standards practice when it comes to plastics. So putting best practice mechanisms in place now will benefit the company and put them ahead of the playing field. So it's sort of, this will ensure that they're equipped to make and implement any of the necessary changes. So thank you. Oh, that's the references. Oh, it's gone. I'll stop sharing. If anyone wants the references, I'm happy to pass them along.
Thank you very much, Freya, for that interesting perspective on what the fishing industry can do. We're going to have questions at the end of each of the speakers, at the end of all the speakers. So right now, I would like to welcome Gwen from the Sea Cleaners. She will be telling us about cleaning up our oceans, the Sea Cleaners perspective, and the work that they're doing at the moment. Gwen, the floor is yours.
Can you see my screen? Hi, everyone.
Yes, you're good.
Okay, good. Hi, everyone. So my name is Gwens Perspective, but Gwen is way easier.
Can you put it in presentation? There we go. Yep.
My name is Gwens Perspective, but it's easier to say Gwen. I work for the Sea Cleaners since last May, and I'm the scientific manager director. So this talk is about the work we do to clean the ocean. And so we have an approach of contributing to a sustainable society by depolluting some seas around the world using the Manta boat that you can see on the screen right now. And for that, we use a holistic approach with engaging all of the possible stakeholders possible, working or being impacted by plastics, and we target the most polluted areas around the world. The mission is to raise awareness and promoting prevention. So we do that by, as I said, approaching it as a holistic approach, by engaging with the local communities, to be able to work on the issues at hand. We are also working with the scientific community, and we hope to collaborate with international teams around the world so that we can share the knowledge of the scientific missions that are going to be on board of the Manta. We are trying to accelerate the transition to a circular economy by integrating our approach into the circular economy that is already in place in the countries where we are going to deploy our boat. And we also develop innovative solutions for waste collection and repurposing on land and at sea. So as you can see, everything is linked to our flagship boat, ship as well. It's called the Manta. As you can see that it's inspired by the manta ray. So the we're going to collect some plastics and do some triage on board, and then either collect it for use on land with integration of into the circular economy, or burn it as you burn into the pyrolysis system unit that we're going to have on the ship. You can see as well that the ship itself is a work of innovation. It's a sailing boat, as our founder is Yvan Bourgnon, who's a French sailor. So we want it to be as low in carbon as possible, so we can to lower our carbon footprint. So it's a sailboat. We have solar energy on board. We have a pyrolysis system on board, and we are trying to use as less energy as possible to do the job we need to do. Sorry, I go back from the United States, and so sometimes my brain between French and English is a little confused. So right now we are also working on a pilot project, because on the boat that you just saw, we're going to have two smaller boats. One is called the Mobula 8, and it's already built. This boat has been tested and is going to be deployed in rivers and really coastal areas towards mangroves and ports, canals, so that we can collect plastics that way. Right now, after identifying the major areas for marine litter, so we targeted Indonesia because of many parameters, but thanks to Laurent Le Breton and the Ocean Cleanup study, we could target the countries that were labeled as the most impacted by ocean plastic pollution. So we decided to go to Indonesia, and after looking at all of the possibilities in Indonesia, the parameters with the boat that we're deploying over there, we targeted a few spots, and we decided right now to go to Bali. We are hoping to have at some point a tracking tool, so that we can also make sure that we know where the plastic mass is going to drift into the Indonesian seas when the Manta boat is going to be deployed over there. So right now we're looking at working with the Mobula 8 so that we can engage all of the stakeholders that are in Bali for now, and then we're going to expand later with the local authorities, scientific community, NGOs, and of course the city where we're going to deploy the Mobula 8. So this is another view of the Mobula 8. As you can see, it's kind of the same idea. We are going to collect the plastic by moving the boat through the plastic pollution, and have a table where we're going to triage and then put the plastic into big bags and the organic matters off board. So this boat is going to be deployed this fall. We hope that it's going to be there at the end of December with a stop in Sri Lanka. So a lot of countries in Southeast Asia are interested in this technology, and we're working with them as well to make sure that we can see if we can collaborate and work together. We're engaging with the local partners, as I said, so that we can not only as I showed you in the slide with the Manta boat, we can do some empowering of the communities into prevention, but also collection that they are doing as well. But we are expanding their collection sites by going into rivers and mangroves and around the areas where they live, so that they can integrate this plastic into the circular economy where they're already working. And my job at the Sea Cleaners is right now to identify the scientific community so that we can work with them, potentially with the Mobula 8 as well, so that we can identify the plastic that we're going to collect, so that we can have a better idea on what kind of plastics will probably be collected with the Manta boat as well, so that we can then understand a little bit of the what is going to be treated on the boat, on the ship, the Manta. So we also have an international scientific advisory board that we call ISAB, and we are developing the scientific strategy for missions on board of the Manta that is going to be deployed in Indonesia around 2024. So this is our work that we do at the Sea Cleaners, and I'm happy to answer any question you have. I think I went very fast.
Thank you very much, Gwen, and I hope everyone watching heard the call for scientific collaboration that she put out there in terms of the Manta. If you have any questions, please go to Slido code OPW. We're going to move on to our next presenter now, Brenda Walters. So Brenda is from the Dyer Island Conservation Trust. She'll be speaking about Clean Marine and Project Storm with the Trust. Thank you very much, Brenda.
Thank you very much for having us join you. Really appreciate it. Just getting my slides ready here. Okay. Right, so I just want to put into context a little bit of where we are, just so you can appreciate what we are seeing every day. We are down in South Africa and we work around the Dyer Island ecosystem, which is an incredible space where we have what we call the Marine Big Five, which includes really iconic species like the African penguin, great white sharks, whales, dolphins, seals. So we have an incredible ecosystem. So of course, we're seeing firsthand some of the impacts of what marine pollution does, which is of course why we're so passionate about it. We have ecotourism partners, and I have to mention this because this is actually the operational financial base of the trust as well. And many of these clients are actually supporting our work. So we do shark cage diving in this area, and we're responsible tourism award winners in the regard and how we operate, and we do whale watching. So we are really privileged to see these species every day. So in terms of that, we've literally been on the sea for the last 2 decades, since 2000, in fact. So that's our 21st year. And the owner actually established the Dyer Island Conservation Trust in terms of doing research that could actually make conservation difference, so that we could influence policy. So we've got about 30 scientific publications on different species. So this is kind of the basis of our work. So one of our missions there, discover, understand this area, obviously protect it, educate people. So right in the beginning, we obviously, this is the founder, Wilfred Chivel, and he actually started the work. But right in the beginning, we could see what the issues were. We needed to understand the species we're working with. So just touching on our projects here, we actually have a whole African penguin and seabird sanctuary. We've seen entanglements, we've seen ingestion by the species. We've seen even white sharks being entangled. So we do all the marine animal rescues as well. So we're out there often picking these species up. We're doing education already in the area. We're looking at underwater video studies. We're doing scientific studies on the smaller shark species. We're doing estuary monitoring, studying of whales, seabirds, etc., shark eggs. So quite diverse. So it means we're on the beach a lot, we're on the sea a lot, we're picking up trash, we're seeing it all the time. And we're seeing where the problems really are, including around our estuary. So of course, we're doing beach cleanups. We also just participated in the International Coastal Cleanup Day. In 1.5 kilometers, we had 0.5 ton of waste that we collected, which is actually pretty horrific. So that was a real big eye opener. And one of the things we picked up in the area, we're working in the Gansbaai Harbour, which is of course where fisheries is. So I was particularly interested in what Freya was saying. but we were seeing a lot of cable ties, a lot of stuff that's obviously being cut off these fishing packaging and things like that. So that's a big issue that we need to tackle. But obviously in terms of, there's a lot of things happening in South Africa and a lot of things that maybe aren't really working or aren't really helping change behavior. For us, we had to say, okay, what is our goal? We obviously support a lot of the initiatives that are going on, but our first priority is minimizing impact on marine animals. So stopping waste getting to sea, preventing it getting to the ocean in the first place. One of the projects we started back in 2010 was the fishing line bin project. And it was actually something we were inspired by the project in Florida in the States, and we implemented it here in South Africa. It took a while to grow, but we placed the first 20 bins in Gwens Perspective, and it has literally grown across the coastline. We, of course, have our cute little iconic African penguin with a missing leg, which we literally have seen at the sanctuary as well. So there's just some examples. I mean, I know we see these kind of things, but it really is, when you see it firsthand. Unfortunately, this penguin was beyond saving. He was already too weak. But that great white shark on the left, we were actually able to retrieve that using some whale disentanglement tools. And that shark had recovered within 6 months. So they have incredible wound healing capabilities. So again, it's sometimes we think of seabirds, but even this project, which is happening on the coast, can literally be translated inland to dams, to rivers, wherever fishing is taking place and where this kind of stuff is a problem. We have a bit of an educational display, and we created a really cute little poster that we could share with schools, just to really spread the message and to make it something that people can relate to. And obviously people can sponsor bin. We do have sponsorship from one of the plastic manufacturers. We work with the Federation here, and he aligns and connects many of the partners within the plastic world. Including with our beach cleanups, of course, all the stats go through plastics as well as to Ocean Conservancy internationally, but they do help make changes from those stats in terms of speaking to the plastic manufacturers. Just in terms of the bins then, so we get the product and we make it on site. We're mapping it along the coastline. We in fact have about 300 bins out there. It's very well received. I don't think not necessarily people say, do fishermen use it? Fishermen do use it, but it's also people like you and me who are walking on the coast, pick it up and have somewhere to put it. And then obviously it can be collected and we can get kind of bulk of it because it's a really difficult product to do anything with. So here's just some of our environmental education team making it and some of our marine volunteers, because we have a volunteer program here as well. So that's how we kind of go into mass production. Just come back from a road show going up to up the coastline. We went as far as PE, dropping off bins and dropping off everything for the International Coastal Cleanup. So that was quite nice to meet some of our partners. In terms of what we do with fishing line, very challenging. We have a lady in the area making jewelry from it, but essentially mostly in South Africa, the only thing we can do is make it into another line, which is used for weed eaters. So there's really not much you can do with it. So quite a difficult product as well. And of course, one that is far too carelessly discarded. So then obviously moving on to Project Storm, we saw a lot of trash washing into the sea from our town. And we live in a bit of a windy place. So often things that are disposed of, even in bins, are flying out of bins, flying around. People don't respect that when the stormwater drains were originally created, that we're of course not planning on having a bunch of plastic and other waste going through there. They were really just for the water runoff. So of course now it's become a much bigger problem. So we did get inspired by the pictures that everybody saw on the internet from Australia, and Wilfred said, no, we have to do it in our area. This is a problem. And we had a particularly bad area also down in our harbour, one that we participated in the cleanup on Saturday. And we needed to address that. So we started working with our municipality, who has a very good environmental team. We're still working with the same people from 10, 11 years ago that helped put up the fishing line bins. And so we started and decided to place the first net. What we did as well is we created a logo around it because we want all partners along the South African coastline to help do the same. I mean, we don't work in isolation, but help map this project, grow it, within the different organizations. There's many other conservation partners that are working with us, like Cape Nature and Sand Parks and other smaller organization, nonprofits that are all promoting and working on these different projects. So we obviously provide advice as required. So again, what was the goal? Minimize the ocean-bound marine pollution, avoid ingestion and injuries by marine animals, collate these waste statistics. How can we drive change from this? How are we going to try and change people's behavior? Obviously, recycle what can be recycled, and of course, educate the public. So we did a bit of a test run on that particular net, and we started this was actually 2019 we did this. And from our 17, what we call catches, we actually analyzed every single net. As you can imagine, it's actually quite a big job. It takes at least 22 hours to sift through everything, to separate the leaf litter, to count out, separate, weigh. We really went, the whole way. But these statistics have really proved invaluable. So of course, within those 17 catches, we had 141 kilograms of trash there. And you can see the biggest thing that came up is something that everybody pops down the drain that doesn't go anywhere, which is nearly 34,000 cigarette butts. So that was really disturbing. Lots of food wrappers containers. And this is just coming from a small section within the Gansbaai town. So again, we saw some interesting things coming up, some cheap chip packets, which are sold at the spaza shops for very little money, around. So a lot of those kind of chip packets, which of course are not recyclable, lots of cans you saw in the picture before, lots of those types of food wrappers and things coming through. We did also do some brand analysis, again, just to see where we can drive change. Those food wrappers that I mentioned there, the Trude tires or those little chip packets, lots of these little smoothies, wrappers, the type of stuff you see in restaurants, halls. So again, not attacking any one product or anything, and it's very good that we have some extended producer responsibility work going on now from government level that will obviously help drive some of these changes in terms of manufacturing. But that was just very interesting to actually work through and look at what's coming up. And because we did those stats, WWF was able in South Africa to take these stats and also use it as part of a case study, which again, then these stats matter. So it was a really good exercise that we actually took the time to analyze what is coming through and from where. The second part of this that we did also with the municipality, they're really pushing this process, is we placed lots of educational messaging around the drains. And then we would also modify that for estuaries, which I'll show you, not estuaries, but like other water bodies where you can adjust your messaging. I think probably going forward, we can put it in different languages. It does tend to, when we're using paint, eventually will fade. So there are different things that we can learn through this process as well, in terms of getting that message out. So we did have some challenges from when we put the net up first. We found it was right getting all the storm surge, that net's been covered in kelp, which had to be removed with digger loaders. We tried to put a retaining wall up, which during some very bad storms last year broke. We fixed it again. We then had the fish factory nearby complaining of some back flooding. It literally has to be emptied every day in our rainy season, which is in our winter months, which we've actually just come through now again. So just some challenges there. We're actually looking at a potential new design for this particular area. We tried something else, like there when you've got something that's running into more a different type of water body. We tried different clamps. We've tried, this was literally off the road, so it's not going to be subject to all the stormwater. We went from using an original fishing net to something with bigger gaps, which you can see here, which means you might still lose some things, but at least then you're catching the bulk. Unfortunately, this net was actually stolen in that particular area because we also have a bit of a poaching problem. And so they decided this net was great. The locals then decided to do something with wood and tried a different netting, also got removed. So again, a little bit of a struggle in that particular area. What we've also done is created a model around funding these. We do apply for grants, of course, but having them funded between, say, 5,000 to 10,000, depending on how big or what you're creating, and actually acknowledging each donor, and we intend to do the same on our website. This is one of the new designs we're working with. This is in Hermanus, which is just an hour from us. And the municipality had actually done a lot of work here already in trying to address this. And they put up the cage originally, but we went and put the net in because, again, with the wind, some of that stuff ends up blowing down the bank. There was quite a steep embankment from this. And what we've realized is it's just not a one size fits all. And I think that's important for people to understand. We're dealing with sometimes these drains dropping off directly. So it's quite a collaboration with your municipality in terms of working with your environmental team, if there is one, many don't have in South Africa, working with the engineers, working with the waste management. So it's a big process. And we actually have a standard operating procedure with our municipality. So then they will obviously handle the waste, unless, of course, we choose to analyze a particular net, then we would be responsible for that. So just some things that we're working on, trialing. We've got some gentlemen in Plainmont, another area, another further hour down, that's all part of the same region. And they're also trying some things using some plastic kind of holders that maybe wouldn't get stolen, or, you know, just trialing different things. So we're all working together to find some best solutions and figure out what's going to work best. Having said that, this has been so far the only municipality that really has come on board with this project. So huge kudos to them, because I am getting calls from across South Africa. I know the City of Cape Town is starting to pick up the reins here. And there has been some work done, but nobody's ever really taken it forward. It does come with a huge amount of effort. You do need a team. It does come with costs. So it isn't as easy as everybody thinks. And so a lot of pressure is placed, but obviously litter booms and other things that have probably been discussed on this forum, there's various things that we can do to mitigate. Again, ultimately, we have to change the first problem, which is the trash being disposed of incorrectly. But yeah, for those of you who want to know how to do it, obviously we were lucky. The municipality had done a very comprehensive document for 2018 of all the storm drain network anyway. So we had that to work with. We knew our problem areas as they do, so we could work in cooperation. In terms of taking funding, us being the nonprofit, assess and study it where possible, recycle what you can, education. We were able to put this messaging out, tell the newspapers, share the message to everyone, and obviously do that wonderful kind of workaround on the storm drains. And obviously making custom made and prioritizing the rainy season. With both projects, whether it's fishing line or storm, there has to be a managing person, a managing authority, whether it's a nonprofit or an NGO or whatever, whoever is deciding to manage it, it has to be monitored. They can't become an eyesore or something that's never emptied. So just that's pretty important. I just want to end with one of our other fun projects that we actually do with one of the old age homes, where we actually take our newspapers and we make bags out of them that our tourists love to see, and we actually pay them for that. So it helps bring in a bit of income for our aged people here in the community as well. So there's just different things and different ways we can give second use. And we do what we can in terms of the hands we have and the people we have to just get the work done. But just appreciate being given this opportunity to actually share this with you, and happy to answer any questions. And I'll just leave you with that stirring comment: the ocean stirs the heart, inspires the imagination, and brings eternal joy to the soul. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Brenda. It's interesting to hear about all the different projects you have that span a bunch of different areas, including awareness, education, you know, capturing of the waste. So I'd like to move on to our question and answer session. If I could invite all the speakers to switch on their cameras. Thank you very much. And to the audience, you can ask questions via Slido, sli.do code OPW. So the first question goes out to all of you in one form or the other. So I would like to know what happens to the waste. So Brenda, you said the municipality takes care of it. Do you know where they put it, what they do with it? And then to Freya, you mentioned that there's the ghost gear that gets fished out. What happens to that ghost gear? And for Gwen, I know you mentioned something about circular economy. And the interesting thing is, if you're collecting waste from the ocean, firstly, who do you take it to? How do you attribute whose waste it is? And then what happens to that waste? So Brenda, would you like to start?
Sure. Again, we have a municipality that does win green awards in their own right. So we're very lucky to have a good partner like that. they had a particularly good recycling center in Amanis. And there was some issues with violence, and it was actually burned down a couple of years ago, but they still take the recycling. It is separate. Having attended, I always feel like when we clean beaches, one of the key messages for the kids is, okay, so where does this go? So yeah, I often feel we're just moving the problem to the landfill. And I know in our landfill here in Gansbaai, it's about 3%, having attended the meetings, 3% is recycling that's coming through. Most people do try in this area we get separate bags to separate it. But I do find as well, a lot of the stuff that you do collect from the beach, you all know is really in not a great condition for recycling. I think from the storm nets, you see some of those plastic bottles and things that's more easily done. So yes, they have their own streams, but our municipality has been rebuilding the recycling side. And so that's very important. I mean, we also participate in South Africa. We also have the African Marine Waste Network with Sustainable Seas Trust. So many partners are sort of collaborating on things like recycling here, and all those conversations that are taking place. But yeah, I do find it a challenge in terms of where does it go next? And constantly, it's a constant messaging to our education in terms of minimizing use. We did a whole trash and show with our group the other day. They all had to make outfits out of trash, which was so fun. But just, again, it's just about taking use, and it's just messaging and also looking at actually not buying in the first place. So just a lot of work around that. But for me, I do feel a lot of these things, we absolutely have to address the headache. And I think in South Africa in particular, we need a much better led government campaign. The president did launch Clean Green Deeds in 2019, but hasn't really caught on. So we absolutely need something that really catches people's attention and drives behavior change. So that for me is a continual thing and something I keep challenging people with.
Thank you very much, Brenda. Can I move on to Freya? Freya, you're muted.
I think after how many years of Zoom, I'll be better at that. I was saying, yeah, thank you guys for your presentations on Brenda and Gwen. It was, they were super interesting. I guess in terms of similar to what Brenda was saying, it's sort of, it is a lot of questions remain as to what happens when fishes or ghost gear sort of is retrieved from the ocean as to where it goes, because yeah, as you were saying, a lot of it isn't in a good condition. It might be rotted, degrading, it kind of can't be reused or upcycled or whatever. So I think that, yeah, in terms of what happens to the nets, that was a big issue for ghost gear. I can't speak to their context too much because they weren't a massive focus of our study, so I'm not entirely sure sort of what they were putting in place to deal with that. But in terms of sort of, I guess, some of the ways the company was trying to overcome some of the issues, even in terms of the factory, they were doing things. They put me in the direction of a company called Formway in New Zealand that was sort of using recycled fishing gear to make sort of various chairs and things like that. They were also sending some of their polybins to make photo frames. I know that there's polybins from the Sydney fish market that are getting made into like children's playground equipment and mailboxes and things like that. And I know as well from Moana, they were sending some of their old gum boots that could no longer be used to make them padding for children's playgrounds. So I guess sort of there's some of the ways that some fishing gear is sort of problems are trying to be solved in terms of what happens to them at end of life, because that is obviously such a big issue to think about with plastics. Like, it's one thing to minimize plastic use or to retrieve it from ocean areas, but yeah, I guess as sort of Brenda was saying, it's a complete other thing to then have to work out what happens to it without it just ending up in landfill or ending up getting mismanaged and getting back into the ocean. So yeah, I don't know if that really answered your question. It was more of a ramble, but thank you.
Thanks very much, Freya. And then Gwen, your perspective.
Yes, so this is really something that is also something of course, interest for us. And we can't wait actually to be in Indonesia and see what can be done with the local community, because we're going to target really cities and areas where we think that the trash is, the waste is in rivers and canals and mangroves, as I said. And without working with the local community to understand what we can do with that waste that we are going to collect, either it's going to be good enough to be recycled, for example, PET with some of the recycling plants that we know are around in Bali. But the other, what are we going to do with that? So either it's going to potentially, yes, end up in landfills, but what we're looking at right now is understanding what kind of other innovation and things can be done with the trash that we are going to collect, and work within the community, because without working in total integration with what can be done on land with the community, it's not going to be sustainable in the end. And as everybody says as well, it's all about the change of behavior on how do we look at plastic? What is plastic for us in our life? And what can we do to try to reduce the use? And especially in those communities, because sometimes also looking at what are the solutions with the local government, especially because of the mandate that the president has put up with 70% of reducing of use of plastic by 2025. So that's a very ambitious target, and we're lucky enough to go in when this is happening. And so we really are so excited actually to go, because we want to work with the community to help towards that goal.
Thank you very much, Gwen. It seems the overall thing is we need to do more behavior change and how we can target that with the communities. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, one thing that I wanted to add, it's not only the community, of course. We always say that the behavior change needs to happen with the consumer, as we call ourselves now, but it's also the industries as well. What can be done to think about the entire life cycle of the plastic, and hopefully one day we'll find something that we can work towards plastic that is actually biodegradable and not biodegradable, because it's not really at this point.
Thank you for raising that. We shouldn't blame the communities alone. It also needs to be an industrial effort, all hands on deck.
Yes, can I just add? Sorry, just in terms of the fishing nets and picking up on what Freya is saying, the nets that we've got, obviously initially we had a fisherman who helped us put up the first one, but we actually received a call from a person inland to Johannesburg, Industrial Netting, who actually were able to sponsor us a whole bunch of net that is used in corporate, but it has a lifespan. So after that, they would have to do something. They don't know what to do with it. So they did send us a whole lot of that, which we were lucky to receive. So we didn't have to go and buy new and recreate the problem. So we were already getting something, we're also giving it a second use. So also important. But I think just in terms of that, I mean, anybody watching and any young group I speak to, I mean, I think there's huge career opportunities in terms of packaging changes, in terms of looking at different product that can be made. There's fantastic things going on in South Africa. I mean, also with, there's a gentleman in Johannesburg as well. They're making roofing out of plastic. They're making almost what looks like marble for your kitchen counters out of printer cartridges that will also just get disposed of. So I think there's such incredible scope for people to start thinking in these directions, because even if we change what we're doing, even if the manufacturers start changing, we're still sitting with waste that exists. So I think there's some incredible scope for some new exciting innovations.
Thank you, Brenda. And while I have you there on the line, there's a question to you about the bins. So do you find that the composition varies seasonally? Because you did mention that, in the rainy season with the drain traps, it flushes out the system. But during summer, do you also see that there's a difference in the composition?
Yeah, we only analyzed during winter, to be honest. And of course, we really lost 2020 in terms of having hands to do it, because we had our volunteer program actually counting all of that and some support. So we didn't do another count now in 2020. The Kleinmond team is going to do a comparison count for us on their side, but absolutely, you know, we don't have a huge amount of rain. So yeah, I don't think composition wise, I think we're certainly not going to see the same numbers. It's not washing down, but you would be seeing the same type of stuff coming through for sure.
Great. And then moving on to Gwen, I had a question about the Manta. And my question is, what's the capacity and how does it hold up in rough weather since you are out on the open ocean?
Now that you're asking the question, I don't remember the capacity, but yes, it's totally gone from my mind, but it's quite a lot. And on the weather, it's a big ship, so it's pretty stable. And of course, if if the weather is really rough, and we would try to avoid big storms, of course, or go back on land and then come back. And but I don't know how I can send the number to people after the talk, because right now it's totally gone from my mind.
Thank you, Gwen. It's all right. We can look it up. You have a website, theseacleaners.org, is it? Great. And then Freya, picking up on what Gwen said earlier about the prospect of putting in biodegradable plastic, was the concept floated around in the fisheries? Were they considering switching from conventional to biodegradable?
In terms of the distribution side of the supply chain, do you mean?
Yes.
Like the packaging? Yeah. Yeah, they were. And again, I guess it was that kind of issue in terms of greenwashing of biodegradable plastics. So they did have some, like in the actual factory at the company I was with, they were making some changes in terms of getting sort of cornstarch plastics in, various PLAs, and sort of trying to make their plastics biodegradable. Again, that carries a lot of issues in terms of not being as biodegradable as people tend to think they are. And they'd also done as well, they'd sort of taken the colour out of some of their packaging to mean that it could be recycled, because when it has colour added, it sort of can't be recycled. So they were doing some of those things. So and I think, the will was really there from the factory managers, that they wanted to look at, how to make their packaging biodegradable if possible. They were looking at sort of ones that involved making a plastic out of kelp, so out of seaweed, and seeing if that could sort of be used in terms of being a more natural based rather than petrochemical based plastic. But yeah, I mean, there's still so many issues in terms of trying to think about how to make these green plastics. But there was definitely, trying to do that. I think there's a lot of misinformation in industry about that kind of thing, which can provide even more hurdles when people are trying to instigate changes. And yeah, obviously cost is another huge one. And as well, obviously, it's really hard with seafood being a wet product and having to have very strict guidelines over how you can serve it and how you can distribute it. But there was definitely intent there to try and sort of have more sustainable packaging.
Thank you, Fred. It's good to know that they are looking at alternatives and, sharing the burden of this plastic issue and trying to do something. Just a question for all three of you. We do have 2 minutes left, so this would be a nice question to close off. What is the most essential collaboration that would help progress of your work and is missing right now? So whoever would like to start? Freya,
Yeah, I'll go.
I see you itching to start.
You could go.
Gosh, confusion all around. I mean, I think there's so many collaborations that could help with this. I think given that in terms of the fishing supply chain, it was those expanded polystyrene fish bins that was the biggest issue. I think having some sort of inter-industry collaboration, which would probably need to have support from governments and be ingrained in policy to actually work. But to have some sort of system where there was a reusable delivery system for seafood internationally, I think would probably be the best way to a collaboration in terms of the seafood industry to minimize their plastics.
Thanks very much for thinking big there for an international collaboration to get all the fisheries on board. I like it.
Well, I mean, I think there's some scope happening in terms of New Zealand and Australia. They have a collaboration going. So obviously, like, it would have to start small scale and be trialed and worked. But yeah, I think there's already kind of things underway. It's just about, how it could possibly work on those bigger global scales.
Thank you, Freya. Brenda, over to you.
Yeah, I think definitely government. Obviously, we need to have strong policy in terms of the waste. I mean, there is a whole waste disposal thing, but I think the EPR work, this extended producer responsibility, making manufacturers also take responsibility is important. And also just with government maybe filtering in those waste disposal, and we're going to need to comment on those, is to have municipalities supporting kind of projects like us as a small nonprofit are doing, because there's a lot of work going on, and mostly the nonprofits are carrying a lot of this work at cost and struggling along and trying to do their best. So we're all working in these little isolated pockets. So we absolutely need cohesive action. I think most of us as small nonprofits and organizations all do work together already very much and partner, but definitely it's kind of that top-down impact, I think, will be really good.
Thank you, Brenda. Definitely the municipality needs to come on board. And then lastly, Gwen, who do you need?
So I found, so we are going to be able to, with the Manta, we're going to be able to collect 1 to 3 hours, no, 1 to 3 tons per hour of and then storage is maybe 50 tons, but the numbers may have changed because we're really looking at what is going to be on board, and there are weight issues, of course, since it's a boat. But the campaigns are going to be 3 weeks at sea, and then we're going to go back. So anyway, so that's for the Manta. And then for me, it's collaboration throughout the plastic world. So it's starting from industry, of course, and making sure that we are all looking at the issues with the same eyes, that it's a huge issue and we need to do something about it. But also for the scientific community, I think it's what is really needed, that I can see for now, is standardization across the board, so that we can actually compare the characterization, the tonnage, the everything basically, because right now it's kind of all over the board. We're trying to understand plastics in the ocean, and it's really hard, and we really need to get together so that we can actually compare, know where we are, so that then we can go back upward and have the policymakers help us regulate, and then down again the chain.
Thank you very much, Gwen. I think what your answers have highlighted is that we need everyone to get on board, from the government, the municipalities, the policymakers, to the industry who are doing this, and to the scientists who are looking at this issue. We need to all sit around the table and work together. So it's 12:03. I'd like to thank all three of you for being present and for sharing your knowledge. It was a very interesting and enriching webinar, if I do say so myself. I want to thank the audience who joined us live, and we shall see you for our next webinar in 2 weeks, I believe. The next webinar will be on the 5th of October. So see you then. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity. Bye.
Yeah, thanks to Kunda for